Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's special meeting of the Economy and Place Scrutiny Committee, held on Wednesday, the 12th of October at 7 p.m. This is being broadcast live on YouTube and recorded for publication at a later date. I now refer you to the agenda items, and item 1 is apologies for absence. Have we any apologies?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Susan Beeston.
Thank you. No substitute?
No.
Okay, thank you. Does any councillor wish to declare an interest on any items on the agenda? Councillor Bentley-Smith?
Yes, Chairman. I may not actually have an interest, but it's the first time that this has come up, so I just want to be certain. Obviously, I'm a borough councillor in Thistlebury, which is one point Wally's Quarry is coming up. But my youngest son does have a number of friends that live in the vicinity of Wally's Quarry that are affected by it. So that could be construed as a personal interest, but I don't know.
I wouldn't say so, but I'll double check with the legal officer. No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. Any other member wishing to declare? No, thank you. So we move on to item 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. They can be found on pages 3 to 6 of your pack, and they are from our regular meeting of the 1st of September 2022. Are there any observations, or can I take them as read? I see everybody nodding, so we'll take them as read. Thank you. So moving on to item 4, the work programme on pages 7 to 10. So again, you have had access to this. There is an agenda for the next scheduled meeting in December, which is fine. As always, any other items you would like, please let me know. Councillor Gorton?
I may well be sort of pushing me luck with this, but I'm going to have a go anyway. There are a couple of sort of suggestions for possible future items, which I'd just like to sort of trail if I could this evening. The one that really does concern me is Basford Busgate. Now, I understand obviously that the business case is under preparation, and I suspect that because of the possible focus on health and environment, it could go to the Health and Environment and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee. My request is, could the aspects of the business case that relate directly to the economy and Newcastle residents travelling to and from work, given that the Busgate will operate at peak times, could that be referred to this committee? Because it seems to me to be very much in line with the committee's remit. And I would think it'd be a disadvantage if members of this group were sort of excluded from scrutinising those aspects. So that's a request. I also have a second request about the local plan, Chair. I think many of us would feel very reassured if we could get an assurance that this committee would have an opportunity to scrutinise the local plan at a stage when it's ready for scrutiny. And in a way that means we could make an effective contribution through scrutiny before things are sort of finalised and published. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Item 2 is the easiest of those, so the answer to that is yes, absolutely, and that will be after the public consultation has been gathered and we've got all of the information ready for scrutiny. So we have scrutinised it before. We will continue to scrutinise it up until its implementation. Item 1, I have a meeting scheduled with the chairs of the other scrutiny committees and the relevant officers. So the clerk has made a note of your request. We'll table that at that meeting and feedback. Thank you. So nothing. Oh, Councillor. Yes, Councillor. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Excuse my throat. I was just wondering, because of the changes in the economy of the country, the cost of living crisis, the cost of everything, whether or not it would be possible for an updated evaluation of our town fund and how the economy, the country's economy, is going to affect the plans for that spending. and yeah, just to make sure that so it can be brought to this committee so we can see what strategies and what plans we have to negate against any rise of cost, cost in terms of inflation. And also there is a little bit of concern as well. I don't know whether this committee is the right place, but it may be the place to put to bed some concerns about Aspire housing and selling off of various things like their charitable arm and their training arm, and because they're a very significant partner in the regeneration really of the town centre. So will there be an opportunity really for us to have a report on those kind of concerns and some reassurances?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moffat. Again, with the SPI, we'll put that into that meeting with the other chairs, and absolutely feedback. It needs to be scrutinised one way or the other, I agree. With regard to just clarify, are you referring to the town deal funding and the future high streets funding in terms of the ongoing potential impact of the current economic crisis?
Yeah, Chair, both really. So we've committed to a certain kind of level of spend and investment in kind of town centre plans, and it's really making sure that we scrutinise. There are some things beyond our control, aren't there, in terms of inflation, etc. So we just need to make sure that we can have plan A, B, C, whatever that might be, so that we minimise and negate any effect on both of those. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very salient point, which we will bring to December. It's a regular agenda item. I'll engage with the executive lead for that and make sure that he covers that off. Thank you. There's nothing else on the work programme, so we will move to item 5, which is public question time. I've not been made aware of any items generated by the public, so we move on to item 6, which is the only substantive item tonight. It falls under urgent business. It is covered in pages 11 to 14 of your pack, and that's an update on Wally's quarry odour issues. And it follows basically a note that was put out by the Chief Executive last week, which he will take us through in a presentation format this evening, and then there will be opportunity for clarification, questions and statements afterwards. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just get the presentation up. See, that's the right one. Right, you can all see that. Okay. Oh. Do I have the ability to close that down? I've closed it on my I've closed it on my screen, but I can't. There we go. Is it? Let's see. Rob, if you're listening, can you minimize the those? That's the one. Can you? Right. Hopefully that little bit will disappear in a moment, but I'll press ahead regardless. Look, I'd like to say thank you for giving me space on your agenda this evening to talk about this. Very conscious that last week, when you'll have had the email from myself setting out the settlement regarding the Wally's Quarry legal action, that will have come as quite a surprise to members, because we were involved in a process that is necessarily confidential, and therefore members won't have been aware of it. And it's a fairly complex business. This has been a hugely important piece of work for the council and for the borough. So it's very keen to be able to come along to a scrutiny committee, talk about the background to this, to the settlement, talk about some of the offer some commentary, if you like, on what that settlement means, and also take any questions that members may have regarding that. Now, I've brought a small army with me tonight, so that if things get overly technical, Nest or Dave will be able to assist with that, and if things get overly legal, I'll be looking to Dan. But it'll be a test of how well I've read the many thousands of pages of paper that have led up to this, as to whether I can answer the questions without that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through some of the background to this, because it is a complex business, the agreement that's been arrived at, and also as I go through that, I'll explain really what the agreement means. Now, one of the first things I just want to cover off is actually the regulation of the Wally's Quarry site itself, because the council has a role in it, but the lead regulator for the Wally's Quarry site is actually the Environment Agency. And you'll probably have heard me or the leader talk about this in other settings. The Environment Agency have a permit that covers the site. They are, as I say, they have the lead legislation, the primary legislation. They're the primary regulator of the site, and are significantly concerned about the regulation of pollution as defined in the environment permitting regulations. So inevitably there will be times over the last little while when the Environment Agency has been doing particular things and not us, and that will continue to be the case going forward. The council also has a particular role in terms of the regulation of the site, and this comes under the Environmental Protection Act, and our concern is really about, our legal concern and duties are to do with any dust, steam, smell, or other effluvia arising on industrial, trade, or business premises being prejudicial to health or a nuisance. And in regards to that, we have a duty to inspect the area for nuisance, investigate complaints to see whether they amount to a statutory nuisance, and if we do identify a statutory nuisance, to serve an abatement notice. Now, with regards to Wally's Quarry, we focused entirely on nuisance in terms of the statutory nuisance and the approach that we took. Prejudicial to health is notoriously difficult to actually be able to pin down, so we focused our efforts on nuisance. So in 2021, we had somewhere north of 20,000 complaints about odours from the site. That was to ourselves. The Environment Agency had probably getting on for twice as many complaints as that. This is, by some measure, the largest source of complaints that the council has had, I think, on any matter. It exceeds the total complaints that we have in any given year for all other environmental issues. We embarked on very detailed investigation work that was led by Nesta and her team to establish whether or not the odours amount to a statutory nuisance. Now, you will hear throughout this presentation me referring to a statutory nuisance, and that is quite distinct from something that is just a bit annoying. So for something to be a statutory nuisance, we assess it against 5 criteria. It's referred to as the FIDAL criteria. So we look at the frequency of the issue. In this case, it's odour. So we'd look at the frequency of the odour. We'd look at the intensity of the odour. We'd look at the duration, how long it's gone on for. We'd look at the offensiveness of the odour and the location at which the odour is, the nuisance is being assessed. So, if we think about landfill gas, which is what we're concerned about here, that is with the hydrogen sulfide in it, that is an offensive odour. If we were next to a bakery, you may have a frequent and intense odour that actually people don't find offensive necessarily. And likewise, an odour that's not in a place where people are living or people are using for recreational purposes, that's unlikely to hit the trigger of being a statutory nuisance. It's a bit like if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there type idea. So last year, August 21, we concluded our investigations and established that there was a statutory nuisance and served an abatement notice on Wally's Quarry Limited. So we did that on 13th of August last year, and the abatement notice required two things. One was to abate the nuisance and to prevent a reoccurrence of the nuisance. So there's two elements of it. One is, if you like, the immediate issue, and then the reoccurrence. Within an abatement notice, we need to allow a certain amount of time for the nuisance to be abated, and taking the advice of our various experts that we'd worked with around this, we arrived at a period of 5 months to abate the nuisance. So within the notice, Wally's Quarry Limited were allowed a 5-month period, after which there should be no odours from this off-site. On the map, if you can just about see, the abatement notice isn't borough-wide. We did some careful mapping of complaints. We did mapping of landfill gas dispersal modelling and such like, and we arrived at this this boundary for the abatement notice, and working on the principle that if we could abate the nuisance there, then there wouldn't be a nuisance outside of that boundary. So on the 2nd of September, Wally's Quarry appealed that, and appealed on 12 grounds, which were fairly wide ranging. So, and this is, I guess, the normal run of events in these things. So they appealed on the grounds that there wasn't a nuisance, that our process was flawed, that there were alternative sources. There was a range of issues. One that's particularly relevant in the context of tonight's presentation is this number 12, which is that best practical means were used to prevent the nuisance. Now, this is a significant defence, because if we'd identified that there was a nuisance, there was a statutory nuisance, but the operator was able to demonstrate that all of their practices on site were as good as practical, so they're, if you like, the best in the industry in terms of what could be afforded, then that is actually a valid defence, and the nuisance could persist. So that best practical means, say, I will come back to later, because it's quite important. So the appeal triggered two things. It stops the clock on that 5-month time period to abate the nuisance, and it also started a fairly detailed legal process that was leading up to a trial in the Magistrates' Court that was tabled for 4 weeks, starting at the end of October. Now, if we'd followed this all the way through the court process, there are 3 possible outcomes that could be achieved in court. One is to allow the appeal, in which case the court would be saying, no, there isn't a statutory nuisance, and our abatement notice would have no effect. The second option that's available to the court is to dismiss the appeal. In that case, they'd be saying, yeah, there is a statutory nuisance, and our abatement notice would be upheld. And the third option would be to dismiss the appeal, find that there's a statutory nuisance, but vary the terms of the abatement notice in some way. And the sorts of things that could be varied there might be the geography for the abatement notice, or the length of time given to actually abate the nuisance. And if we'd gone through that process and say we'd arrived at number 2 or number 3, the clock would then start again on the 5 months to abate the nuisance. One of the other things just to be really clear on is the court process at this stage would not have any remit to impose any sanctions. So it would just be putting in place the abatement notice. It would deal with costs, but it put in place the abatement notice, and it then falls to the operator not to cause a future nuisance, and for the council to monitor that, and if it finds that there is a statutory nuisance, to take action. We then have a slight complication that comes into the mechanics of this, due to the fact that the Environment Agency are the lead regulator. If we'd gone through this process and at some future date sought to enforce the abatement notice because of a future statutory nuisance, we would first have to get the Secretary of State's permission to do that, because actually the Environment Agency are the lead regulator. So it's a complex process. So we entered into a mediation process with Wally's Quarry, and if you've read the cabinet reports over the last year since the 13th of August, certainly in the early ones of those, we trailed this as something that may assist, and particularly in matters that are really complex like this, the courts do encourage the parties to try and actually reach a settlement outside of court, frees up court time, and it can result in significantly better outcomes. In the court process, it's fairly binary. There's a winner and there's a loser. There's someone who's right and someone who's wrong, and it's necessarily an adversarial process. Mediation is more discursive in nature, provides the opportunity for sort of an exploration of each other's positions and come to a more rounded outcome. So the mediation process that we embarked on, we were lucky to have the support and the guidance of a former Supreme Court judge and environmental law expert, the Lord Carnworth of Notting Hill, who's hugely knowledgeable in these areas and guided the mediation process, with the result that we were able to reach a settlement with Wally's Quarry that enabled them to withdraw their appeal. So through this process, we were able to set aside the 4-week trial and save the uncertainty and the time commitment that's involved in that. So, going to take you now through the details of the settlement agreement that was reached. Very importantly for us, through this process, Wally's Quarry agreed to withdraw their appeal. So that means that the council has now got a legally enforceable abatement notice in place that specifically precludes the reoccurrence of a statutory odour nuisance from the site. And by way of context, if I've just reflected on my earlier comments, if we'd gone through the court process, this would be what we got, the bare bones of this. So many of the other bits that I run through are actually sort of real added value in the process. We did make one minor amendment to the abatement notice, and that is, you'll notice on the slide here that there's the Wally's Quarry site itself is hatched red, and this is correcting a technical issue with the first abatement notice, which didn't exclude the site itself from the abatement notice. Now, necessarily, there cannot be a statutory nuisance on the site. It needs to be off the site. So that's been withdrawn, or the site itself has been excluded. But all of the other properties that were previously covered remain covered. And it remains the case that it's abate the nuisance and prevent reoccurrence. The other thing that remains the same is the 5-month time to abate. Now, we're in a very different place in terms of the nuisance now compared to where we were in August last year when we served the notice. And I'll come to that in a bit of detail later on. But nonetheless, that 5-month window remains for Wally's Quarry Limited to comply with the notice. So We then get into, for want of a better word, the added value elements of this. I mentioned earlier about the importance of best practical means. So the agreement we've reached recognised that the plans that are currently in place with on the site, and that's the landfill gas management plan, waste acceptance and pre-acceptance procedures, leachate management, odour management, capping and phasing plans, are actually amount to best practical means currently. And we've accepted that point on the advice of expert landfill and odour practitioners that we worked with through this process. And the process that we went through there, our experts provided advice, Wally's experts provided advice, the experts got together and had sort of, if you like, peer-to-peer discussions, which allowed us to arrive at the conclusion that actually the plans, etc., in place are best practical means. There's an additional item there that's not a plan, which is about minimising the capping face, using best endeavours to minimise the operational operational area of the site. So that is the proportion of the site that at any one time is uncapped and used for tipping waste. So keeping that tipping face as small as possible. Now, the agreement, as well as recognising that best practical means are in place at the moment, also recognises that what constitute best practical means changes over time. So specifically in three areas. One, it will change as the geography of the site emerges, the landforms, etc., on the site emerge over time. It will change depending on waste inputs, and it will also change depending on meteorological conditions. Now, that's something that residents in the area will be keenly aware of, that certain conditions, certain meteorological conditions, give rise to more odours than others do. So the agreement recognises that what constitutes best practical means changes with these, and actually it falls to Wally's through their dialogue with us to both maintain best practical means and demonstrate their compliance with best practical means. So that's, I would say, adds a richness in terms of the information that and the information exchange that we would be having with the operator over time. Now, that links closely to the next thing, which is that out of this, I've committed that the council and Wally's will engage constructively with each other and in good faith. And there, Wally's will be sharing information with us in terms of best practical means. So Nesta and myself in particular will be having, for the first, I think it's for the first 6 months, monthly meetings with the operator. We've got a secured agreement to go on site from time to time to inspect conditions on site, and also to receive information about those plans, metrics that that demonstrate ongoing compliance. So that's a significant added benefit of this process. The engaging constructively and in good faith, I think, is also it's just an important value in this in terms of as we move forward, and is something that wouldn't have come out of a formal trial, if you like. We've also, through this agreement, Wally's Quarry Limited have agreed to specific measures relating to community engagement. So one of these, and if you like, I suppose one of the simplest, is to publish the various plans on their website. I've long had the view that if we'd had some mechanism to be able to say to residents, something, there's going to be well drilling, or there's going to be something happen on site that's has the potential to cause a nuisance tomorrow, and tomorrow there's a nuisance, actually residents would deal with that more easily than not having any advance notice. And so we've actually secured agreement through this to provide advance notification of activities in site in future that could give rise to odours in the community. So that's should be a real boon. We've also agreed to refresh the liaison committee and also to publish recordings of the liaison committee online, initially on Wally's Quarry Limited's website and then eventually on the council's website for posterity. So that will provide greater transparency around the discussions that happen about the management of the site. In terms of costs, the range of issues that Wally's appealed on meant that we needed to prepare a case that addressed all of those. So you'll remember that the council set aside £1 million in total from reserves in order to deal with this issue. We haven't spent all that, I should say, and we secured through this 400,000 contribution towards the council's costs, and that is the lion's share of the council's direct external costs on this. And we also secured £60,000 towards future monitoring activities. So, recognising that the community have become very used to the monitoring information that's provided to it on a monthly basis through the 4 monitoring stations that we jointly fund with the Environment Agency and the County Council. So making sure that we've got some resource to carry on some monitoring in the future, and also the costs of us in interpreting that monitoring data, etc. And ongoing monitoring is a critical part of the work that we would do in order to make sure that the best practical means are happening on site and that we don't have statutory nuisance off site. So it's important. So in total, £460,000 coming back to the council through that process. So the key benefits of this, one is actually, we have the ability now to establish a good dialogue between ourselves and Wally's Quarry Limited about the practices on site, and to just know much more about what's happening on site, what plans are, what's working, what doesn't work, etc. at any particular point in time. Importantly, also establish information flows to both the council and to the community. I think that's going to be an important benefit to this. But equally, what we have is the critical vehicle that's necessary for enforcement if in the future we do have a statutory nuisance that we need to act on. So we will be monitoring what's happening on site, monitoring what's happening off site, and having that ongoing dialogue. But we've retained the position that if it's necessary to enforce that abatement notice, then enforce the abatement notice we would do. Now, I mentioned earlier about when we were accepting best practical means, we were doing so with the benefit of our experts. I think it's also just useful to offer members some reassurance as to how the conditions have improved over the last while. And I've got 2 slides that are just going to run through this. Now, I think I may have used this slide at the full council presentation, but it's worth revisiting. The bars are the percentage of time that hydrogen sulfide levels have been above the annoyance level, which is 7 micrograms per
micrograms per meter cubed.
Micrograms per meter cubed. Yeah, over 30 minutes. It's technical. And the blue line is the complaint data, the complaints into the council. And these track very, very faithfully that the complaints that we get tightly reflect the hydrogen sulfide levels that are being reported from the monitoring stations. You'll also see that on those bar graphs, the monitoring station that consistently shows a higher level of exceedances is this yellow one. That's what we know and love as MMF9. It's the one that other people would know as being on Gallingale View. So, you know, the others for the last few months have actually been registering 0. Gallingale at the moment is down around about 3-4% of the time it's gone over that threshold, and you can see that, you know, the complaint levels are right down. So compared to where we served notice back in August, you know, we're in a fundamentally different position. The next slide, I don't think you will have necessarily seen this data, but just comparing April last year with September, you know, with where we are today. So in April 21, we received 3,300 complaints. This month, 53. The monitoring stations were showing exceedances over that 7 micrograms per meter cubed for about a third of the time, 34% of the time. Now it's down to about between 2 and 4% of the time, and that mostly at only one of the stations. The peak levels of hydrogen sulfide that's being measured at those monitoring stations in April, the peak level was 1,100 micrograms per meter cubed, September 15. The percentage of the site that's capped, we don't have one for April, but in May it was 39%. It's currently somewhere north of 80%. The concentration of the gas itself, back in April, it was hydrogen sulfide within the gas pipework that was going to the destruction engines was 7,500 parts per million. Now it's around about 1,300 parts per million, and is at a level that's comparable with other landfills. And the gas capture rate, the amount of gas that's actually been taken off the site and destroyed each hour, has gone from 2,800 meters cubed to 3,100 meters cubed. Now, you'll have heard me talk before about the fact that the solution to this issue is actually quite simple in terms of description, albeit difficult, not quite so simple to achieve. And it's about containment, capture, containing the gas, capturing the gas, and destroying the gas. So the capping shows the containment. That cap is critical to being able to hold gas in the site and not have what are called fugitive emissions that go off into the atmosphere. The capture of the gas and the destruction of the gas is this going from 2,800 up to 3,100. And you'll see that those two things, together with the reduction in the peaks, then is what will be driving the reduction in complaints to the council and the reduction in exceedances. So we're content now that the actions that have been taken since we served the abatement notice over that time, in terms of capping and phasing, in terms of capping and in terms of gas capture and gas destruction, has put the site into a position where we're content that actually there is currently good practice. Our efforts now are about ensuring that we maintain that good practice and make sure that we don't see any drift in this complaint and annoyance level. I'm not necessarily expecting to get complaints to zero, because there will be times where we get odours off site. Occasional odours won't necessarily hit the threshold of being a statutory nuisance. And so what we're not saying is this is the end of odours, but it is we're a long way down the road towards achieving that. So that's a run through of what we've done and what it means, and quite happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for that presentation. I think just before we take questions, the leader just wants to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, for me, and I'm sure it is for everybody, this is really good news, particularly the abatement notice is now in place and that clock is now reticking, that restarted and is ticking on the five months to keep up what is now the good work on the site to keep the odour under control. I think one thing that's really important is that the operators acknowledged that their landfill was the source of the complaints as well, which has never happened before. And I think that's in this agreement, which is key as well for residents to see that somebody's taken responsibility for this, which I think is absolutely key. I think also for me is Martin touched on the 60k towards the monitoring, also the access that council officers will have to the site. I think what we've done is almost created our own local regulatory framework around Wally's Quarry, where we feel, I feel, in the past the EA has failed to do that, put in, regulate the site properly, and we have a chance now going forward to do that locally, and keep an eye on this for our residents. I think that's really key. And also, I think the point which was made about Wally's Quarry being more amenable to the community, communicating with the community, I think that's really key, and that's something they failed on miserably in the past. I hope this is a fresh start really for that. I think the liaison committee, people have been having access to the liaison committee by seeing what happens there through, if there is going to be an incident of odour, that they give a warning system ahead of time. I think that will help with the community as well. So I think, a good deal to move forward on. And I think, as Martin showed in those last two slides, moving in the right direction. I think we've got a framework now to ensure it keeps in the right direction. And if it isn't, we always have our abatement process to go through. I'm sure this council will not flinch from taking that forward if we need to do that. Finally, Chair, thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to Martin and the team, because a lot of hard work has gone into this, and our legal team, and also Nesta, particularly named Nesta there because of the work that she's been putting in on this throughout this to get the evidence, and for Martin for obviously coordinating it all. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tagg. So we'll open up for debate and questions. I've got two councillors wishing to speak, three councillors up to now. So I'll start with Councillor Panther, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, 3 quick points. Firstly, I think highlight what our leader has just said, and congratulate the council and its negotiating team for an excellent result that's benefiting absolutely everyone. Secondly, can Mr. Hamilton's report be circulated for the benefit of all councillors? And thirdly, is there any feedback as yet from the protest groups on this?
Mr. Hamilton.
Well, thanks for your comments on that. In terms of the presentation, we can make that available. It's fairly faithful to the email that members already had, setting out the detail, but certainly we can make that available. The only feedback in terms of protest groups that I've seen has been on social media, and I think it's been largely positive and largely welcoming of the progress that's been made.
Thank you. Councillor Beckley-Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would formally like to have recorded in the minutes my thanks as the ward councillor, or one of the ward councillors for Thistlebury, for the work that officials in the borough have done in order to achieve this result, which my congratulations and thanks as well. The second point that I have is a question and an assurance. And again, I think this is actually quite important more for the minutes, because I think the leaders already touched on it actually, in that previously the situation or the relationships between Borough, Environment Agency, whatever, and Wally's Quarry have not been satisfactory. But as a result of this successful mediation, there is going to be a new approach going forward, and that we have confidence that this new approach, new situation, will do quite a lot to inform residents and so forth that we heard about, and make the situation better. But I would, Chairman, formally put the question and ask for an assurance or a reassurance on that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, what is the precise point that you want reassurance on? Yeah, it's just that the leader touched on it, and we've heard that going forward,
the situation is going to be changed with the liaison committee and so forth. And without going into the detail of that, that gives me great confidence. But formally, I have to ask the chief executive for an assurance that that is the case.
Right. Yeah, and I can give you that assurance. One of the commitments that I've made personally in this process is that I'm going to be given, you know, this has been a significant part of my life and for the last year and a bit, as it has been for all of the team here. And, you know, I've committed that now that we have this agreement in place, I'm going to be putting personal time and energy into the relationship that is necessary with Wally's Quarry Limited and also with the Environment Agency. You know, I put a lot of store in having the relationships in place in order to make progress. So I'll be investing my personal time and energy to making sure that not just the words of the agreement, but the spirit of the agreement and the spirit in which the agreement was reached actually come into, you know, are brought for full benefit of residents.
Come back, Councillor.
Yes, I'd just like to thank the chief executive for that reassurance, which gives me great confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchinson-Plunkett.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Martin, and the team, you know, for all that you're doing on this matter. Mine sort of not really touching up on what we've sort of talked about tonight, but it's on about the lorries that are parking up outside of the site. Is this sort of still the case? What action have we taken as a council to you know, to get this matter resolved?
Yeah, Councillor Tang, do you want to come back?
Obviously, that's a county council issue, and it falls within half of it falls in my county division. And obviously, a planning application has been put in by the operator to move the lorries off the road onto site to queue, which is what happened up until a couple of years ago, actually. And it kept the traffic. There was an agreement; it wasn't a planning permission at that stage. So at the moment that planning permission is being verified, a couple of questions have been asked of the operator by the county before it can move to a planning committee process, and I think it probably, hopefully, before the end of the year. But I would urge the operator to, in the good spirit of what we've talked about here, is to provide that information and move forward on this application so we can see if that can get permission. And I know it's not supported by all the community. I think Silverdale Parish Council are against the proposals, but I think there can be conditions attached to it to ensure that those concerns are taken into account. So I think that the ball is in the operator's court, and under this this process we're in now of goodwill between us, I think let's get that sorted and get that another thing that's causing issues and frictions in the community sorted.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I just come in for one more question to the chief executive himself? Martin, you might have picked this up already, and apologise if I've sort of missed it, but can you just confirm, based on the odour, that we've got a process that's robust if this odour increased again, for the council taking action regarding that? So I think you'll be hard pressed to find another council that is now more practiced at finding odours than this one, and because it's not just. I'm going to be technical for a minute. It's not just about there being an odour. It's about there being a statutory nuisance. And we've done a number of things in the past in order to prepare our investigation, down to the level of actually having particular officers' nasal acuity tested to make sure that they had normal sense of smell and could therefore credibly give evidence on odour, right? So we've gone to that level. When we're looking at statutory nuisance, we're testing it against that FIDAL 5 criteria that I talked about. So we are now well practiced at identifying that. We have the essential platform in place, which is an abatement notice, which allows us to now say, okay, if there's a problem, we can prosecute for that, not as we have been. If there's a problem, let's get an abatement notice. So we're a step further from that. The other area where we are in a really good place now through this process is, as I mentioned, one of the critical defences against statutory nuisance is whether or not there's best available techniques in place, best practical means in place. If through this process, we have now got a dialogue, we have an information flow that will allow us to maintain an overview of that over time. Because the one place that you don't want to discover that best practical means were in place is in court. You need to have a good sense of whether best practical means are in court. So, you know, we're in a position where we've got sort of, we'll have rich understanding of the information of what's gone on. But critically, if there is any reoccurrence of odours in the community, we are also in a much better position than previously to be talking to the operator about that, to be understanding what they're doing to remedy it, et cetera, and to engage in positive work on behalf of the community. So it's you know, we're in a strong position.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moffat.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for all the work that the officers have done on this. Councillor Tagg said, and I completely agree with him, that the EA failed to regulate. And my feeling is that if the Environment Agency had played the role that they should have been playing in the way they should have been playing it, dating back a significant number of years, then we could have prevented some of the distress and cost of an officer's time on this terrible situation. I'm wondering, and I did bring it up when we had a council meeting with the Environment Agency, that I think they failed in their duty significantly. There is evidence that has been sent to us from members of the public who called for the Environment Agency to carry out investigations into Wally's Quarry, dating back to December 2018, then January 2019. There is a record of the Environment Agency's investigating officer actually stating out loud that he believed that the community was exaggerating the problem. And he was sitting in meetings with Wally's Quarry, which meant that he wasn't really playing what I and other ordinary people would think of as an investigating officer's role. I wonder whether or not we as a council or the scrutiny group could explore the possibility of bringing about some kind of public inquiry into the lack and the failure of the Environment Agency, in order that we can hold them to account in some fashion, and also with our moral duty to other communities that may face the things our community have faced, that the Environment Agency actually step up and carry out their responsibilities correctly in future.
Thank you. Who wants to take that?
I think
Yourself?
Councillor Tagg and I may do a tag team on this one, because you know, the leader and myself have both at various times written to senior people in the Environment Agency, to ministers, etc., expressing the concerns about the regulatory performance. And I think that there's two separate issues that we've raised. One is whether there was enough being done, but the other issue is actually whether the regulatory framework itself is fit for purpose. And I think it's fair to say that we didn't get very far with those discussions. But again, on the back of this, I think there's the opportunity to be having fresh discussions about this particular aspect of it. This very process that I described, where two agencies have got slightly overlapping areas of responsibility. Where something overlaps, there's always the chance that stuff falls in between. And there is also, the fact that we then would need to get permission in order to pursue our, it's just a complex legislative process. But so, we're not sure that the framework is necessarily fit for purpose. But certainly I think we're in a position now to be saying, okay, let's have that conversation again.
Anything to add?
I completely agree with Martin. I think also our MP Aaron Ball is taking up this very issue. I think he's the right person to tackle this with the government over the failure of the EA. That's what we call it, and that's because what it was over a long period. I think that's key. Also, locally, there's been a group which has mainly been officers, has been officers from the various authorities, county, borough, health, the EA have been meeting SCG. There's going to be a political version of that, which I will be on, so will the leader of the county council, so will the police and crime commissioner, where we'll sit down with the EA actually in a room and talk about any issues that come up. I think that's something that's been missing, something we've been asking for, and one of those is in the diary for later in before the end of the year. I think that could be a forum also to hold the EA to account where they haven't had political oversight before. It's something that's been hard won really, and I think we should make use of that locally. But I think on the bigger issues, I agree with you. We took to the whole council, didn't it, before the elections in May. We agreed that we wanted some action taken against the EA for the failure to regulate the site, and that fell on deaf ears, I think. But now we've got this agreement here, which really backs up I believe what we were saying, I think, and I think it's more power to Aaron Bell's arm to get some changes made. So this doesn't happen elsewhere, because again, across the country or landfills like this, there is an industry that is got concerns about the way the industry is run. I think this could happen elsewhere, so we need a regulatory framework that stops that, and we don't have another Wally's Quarry elsewhere, or this doesn't become a problem again.
Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just going to ask also whether or not it would be possible, Councillor Tagg or Martin, for me to come and speak to you about the stuff that's been sent to me, because there is a big issue of future responsibility and acting in the right way. But there is also some historical things which community members have brought to our attention. I don't know what to do with it because I'm just an ordinary councillor. I don't know really what to do, but I think that we need to have a look at it, and perhaps Daniel might be able to help as well to see what steps could be taken. I don't want it just sitting there in my inbox and not acting on it. But everything else that you said is really reassuring, but I do think that they do need to be held to account, because people have made conscious decisions. We know that our community was using the phrase gaslighting consistently, and I think this came right from the very beginning about the lack of seriousness that the Environment Agency was taking residents' complaints with, and I think that we do need to look seriously back at that. It's great to know that the MP is taking it up and taking it seriously as well. Thank you.
I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Hamilton and the leader, but any councillor with such information should have meetings with both bodies. So yes, absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Beckley-Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've long thought actually that the Environment Agency, which is described as an environment agency, has in fact been more of a water agency, because it was born out of the Thames Conservancy, National Rivers Authority and so forth. And so certain aspects of its statutory roles have had less priority. And I think we see an example of what's been happening here. So I think there is a strong argument for looking at the framework of which this could be the case that actually proves the point of something that I've long suspected, having actually worked professionally in the area for a number of years since the Environment Agency came about. With regards to the particular detail here, I think Councillor Tagg has articulated quite neatly anything that I would have said. So I don't comment on that point. But what I do think is that obviously you've got things moving in parallel. You've got the issues with the Environment Agency and what we perceive as their failure to act in a way that we would have preferred. So there's that aspect. But then also what we do need to make sure is that the new arrangements with Wally's Quarry and so on and so forth, that energy is put into that to make sure that that works. I'm not wanting to neglect the point that Councillor Moffat's made and indeed the leader for one moment, but I do think that in the short term, the priority should be making sure that the new arrangements with Wally's Quarry actually work whilst the other moves forward in the background. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't think that was so much of a question more than a statement, but does anybody want to respond? No. Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak? No, so that just leaves it to myself, really. I've got a couple of questions which I'd like to raise. And the precursor to that really is recognition, first of all, that I think this is a substantive step forward. And it allows us to work more in partnership with the operator to make sure that this doesn't become a nuisance in the future. That said, we have an abatement notice which is now live. What I'd like to understand is, given some of the data that is being presented, and we see a dramatic improvement in terms of a year on, but in September you put up in the table that there was a 2 to 4% exceedance of the World Health Organization statutory nuisance guidelines of 7 micrograms per meter squared over 30 minutes. And there was also 58 complaints registered. Now, whilst they're dramatically improved, actually, if you look at them in isolation, that's still quite a number. So my question is, how does that reference to the abatement notice, and what would actually need to happen to invoke basically the abatement notice to be invoked?
Okay, that's a cracking question. Right. So I am just taking a moment to just collect my thoughts on that, because actually what we have is if you like a flow process or whatever we had. So if we take, let's start with the 2 to 4%. No, let's start with the 50 complaints. If we have 50, if we've complaints arising, the first thing we need to do is, if for want of a better word, triangulate those. We need to investigate the complaints and establish whether or not they are complaints of odor of sufficient intensity, et cetera, as to be a statutory nuisance. So as part of that, we would be sending folk out to try and witness those odors. That's the trained environmental health officers, be triangulating against the data from the 4 monitoring machines. We have our Jerome machines that are out monitoring data as well. So let's assume for a moment that we got to the stage where we said, okay, there is a picture emerging here that says there is a statutory nuisance. As we're going through that process, because of this relationship, we routinely anyway share complaint data so that the operator can see what's happening. So we would be talking to them about those issues and understanding what's happening on site, etc., that might be giving rise to something that might be giving rise to those complaints. We would be testing out that best available techniques, because there's no point in trying to prosecute statutory nuisance if there is best available techniques. So I keep flipping between best practical means and best available techniques. They're essentially the same thing. BPM.
Yeah.
So there's no point in prosecuting for the odor if there is best available techniques in place. So so we would actually be going through the process of actually trying to remedy the issues. If we got to the stage where there was just a persistent problem that wasn't being remedied, then that's the point at which we would be saying, right, we now need to talk to the Secretary of State about getting permission to take that to the next stage. Okay. Now, let's come to the 2 to 3%, to 3 to 4% bit. So that's telling us that for 3 to 4% of the time over a month, there have been instances where the odor has been above 7 micrograms for 30 minutes. Now, if that happens to be in the middle of the night, and actually we're not getting complaints at that time or about that time, that actually falls short on that FIDOL process, because you've potentially got an odor when there isn't somebody being disadvantaged by that odor. So that's why we can't just go on the percentage. It's actually quite a complex thing. So there's as I say, there's a triangulation for looking at the complaint data, validating those complaints, building up that triangulation, understanding what's happening on the site, and we would be asserting the abatement notice if that was the only way that we could actually get that problem solved. Mm-hmm. And my hope is, and the intention is through this process, is through the conversations and the dialogues and the intent, etc., we shouldn't be having surprise spikes in hydrogen sulfide that aren't anticipated by the operator, aren't anticipated by the council or the community, because the operator will have told us about them. Yeah. The important thing is, if we get a problem, we know that can be sorted very, very quickly. That's critical.
Thank you. So just as a follow-up question to that, the abatement notice presumably went live last week?
The abatement notice went live last Thursday and starts the timer ticking on a 5-month window that the operator has to comply. So we will be using the next 5-6 months to develop the relationship, to develop the practice, to develop the flows of information, because the ability to assert that notice doesn't kick in until those 5 months have elapsed.
Okay, so we can't actually serve the abatement notice until 5 months have elapsed. No,
the abatement notice has been served. The abatement notice is in place.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but they have got 5 months to abate the notice, the nuisance. So there is this window that I mentioned at the beginning. Our original abatement notice had a 5-month window to abate the nuisance. The clock stopped on that and started again last Thursday. So there's still 5 months, but it's 5 months in a fundamentally different situation in terms of odor levels.
Yeah. Thank you. That's clear. The next question I think is a lot easier. Just for clarity, who makes up the liaison committee, please?
There are representatives of the County Council, of the Borough Council, and local community. Environment Agency attend. The obviously Wally's Quarry Limited attend. Do the police attend? I don't think so. No. So there's quite a mix, and the intention is to look at that membership and make sure that the membership's working as effectively as it can.
Right. So the members of the public are represented through a body.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just to add to that, it's part of the planning permission that the county council gave originally, and the liaison committee has stipulated in that condition as a legal document, and there are representatives for the community that need to be invited to that. Keele Parish Council, Silverdale Parish Council are also on it as well. But one of the things we've agreed here in this agreement is that be refreshed. I think it needs to be refreshed. I look forward to that happening and for the operator to do that.
Thank you. Before we close, any further Questions from members? No. Okay, so that is the conclusion of tonight's meeting. I would like to reiterate what a number of councillors have already stated, and that is a big thank you, particularly to the officers, as to all the hard work that's gone into getting to this point. It's taken a long and substantive time period and a lot of effort and paperwork to get to this. So that will be formally minuted as has been requested. So that concludes this evening's meeting, and we will close at 12 minutes past 8. Thank you, members and officers.